In this episode, we're going to bring together three practical levers that security leaders use to reduce malware risk in real environments: hardening, and endpoint detection and response; EDR, strategy, and response hooks that make containment and recovery fast when something slips through. Malware is not a single kind of threat. It is a broad category that includes everything from credential stealers and remote access tools to ransomware and quiet spyware. What makes malware so dangerous is that it can turn one small mistake, like opening the wrong file or approving the wrong prompt, into a chain of events that spreads across systems. Beginners sometimes imagine malware defense as a single product that blocks bad files, but modern environments need layered controls because attackers adapt, new variants appear, and some compromises happen through trusted channels. The goal is to reduce the chance malware can execute and persist, reduce the time it can operate undetected, and reduce the blast radius if a device is compromised. By the end, you should understand what hardening does at a high level, what an EDR strategy should achieve, and how response hooks turn detection into action quickly enough to matter. A strong place to start is by defining malware risk in practical terms, because risk is not just the existence of malware in the world, it is the likelihood that malware will successfully run in your environment and cause harm. Malware risk depends on how frequently endpoints are exposed to untrusted content, how permissive endpoint configurations are, how well identities and access are controlled, and how quickly incidents are detected and contained. In cloud-heavy organizations, endpoints are often the entry point to cloud services, which means malware can become an identity and data problem as much as a device problem. A credential stealer on a laptop can lead to stolen tokens, unauthorized access to cloud storage, and business email compromise that spreads through trusted communication channels. Ransomware can disrupt availability by encrypting local data, shared drives, and even connected cloud repositories if access allows. Spyware can quietly collect sensitive information and exfiltrate it over time, creating a slow-burn breach that is hard to detect without strong monitoring. The leadership mindset is to treat malware as an operational risk that must be managed continuously, not as a rare emergency that is addressed only after an outbreak. This mindset makes it easier to justify steady investments in prevention, detection, and response capabilities. Hardening is the first lever because it reduces the attack surface and makes it harder for malware to execute, persist, and spread even when an endpoint is exposed. Hardening means configuring systems so risky features are limited, unnecessary services are disabled, privileges are constrained, and secure defaults are enforced. Beginners sometimes think hardening is a one-time checklist, but in real environments, hardening is a baseline practice that must be maintained as systems change. A hardened endpoint tends to resist common malware tactics, such as installing itself as a persistent service, running unauthorized scripts, or using unnecessary ports and services to communicate outward. Hardening also often includes reducing local administrative rights, because malware that runs under a non-admin context has fewer options for persistence and system modification. Another key part of hardening is timely patching of operating systems and applications, because many malware infections begin with exploiting known vulnerabilities in browsers, document viewers, or other common software. The core point is that hardening changes the default outcome of a mistake, making it less likely that an exposed file or a malicious link results in successful execution. Leaders should see hardening as the quiet foundation that makes everything else easier because fewer incidents occur and the incidents that do occur are less severe. Hardening also includes controlling what software can run, because malware is ultimately code execution, and reducing arbitrary code execution reduces risk dramatically. In many environments, malware arrives as an executable, a script, a macro-enabled document, or a malicious installer disguised as something useful. A hardened approach limits these paths by restricting risky scripting features, controlling installation rights, and limiting the ability for users to run unknown programs. The concept is sometimes called application control, meaning the environment prefers known, approved software and treats unknown software as suspect. Beginners do not need to memorize specific mechanisms to understand the logic. If the endpoint only runs what you expect, it becomes harder for malware to operate. Hardening also addresses lateral movement, because malware often tries to spread by using shared credentials, scanning networks, and exploiting weak configurations on neighboring systems. Endpoint firewalls, network segmentation, and disciplined credential practices reduce these opportunities. Another hardening concept is limiting credential exposure on endpoints, such as reducing cache secrets and using separate accounts for privileged work, because malware often aims to steal credentials as a way to expand impact. When hardening is done thoughtfully, it reduces the number of paths malware can take, which means even a successful initial infection has fewer options for escalation. The second lever is EDR strategy, and it is important to treat EDR as a strategy rather than as a product, because the technology only helps if it is deployed, monitored, and tied to response actions. EDR is designed to detect suspicious behavior on endpoints, such as unusual process launches, unexpected network connections, credential access attempts, and patterns that suggest malware activity. Unlike older antivirus approaches that rely heavily on known signatures, EDR focuses on behaviors and telemetry, which helps detect new or modified malware. A strategy includes deciding which endpoints are covered, what telemetry is collected, how alerts are triaged, and how detections are tuned to reduce noise. Beginners often assume detection systems should alert on everything, but alert fatigue is a serious risk because overwhelmed teams miss the signals that matter. A mature EDR strategy prioritizes detections that indicate high-impact behavior, such as credential dumping, persistence attempts, command and control communication, and ransomware-like file operations. It also ensures that alerting aligns with the organization's ability to respond, because detecting a problem you cannot act on does not reduce risk. Leaders should think of EDR as the smoke detector and security camera system for endpoints, but only useful if someone listens and reacts. A key part of EDR strategy is coverage and consistency, because malware risk increases when some endpoints are protected and others are not. Attackers do not necessarily target the most protected systems. They target the easiest entry points. If contractors, remote devices, or niche systems are unmanaged, those become attractive targets. A mature strategy defines which device categories must have coverage and how exceptions are handled. It also considers how EDR interacts with identity and cloud telemetry, because endpoint events often connect to authentication events and cloud actions. For example, if an endpoint begins accessing many cloud resources unexpectedly, that may indicate token theft and automated exfiltration. When EDR signals are correlated with identity signals, detection becomes stronger and response becomes more precise. Another strategic element is tuning, which means adjusting detection rules and baselines so normal administrative activity is not constantly flagged while truly abnormal behavior stands out. Tuning is not about hiding alerts. It is about making alerts meaningful and actionable. Beginners should understand that an untuned EDR deployment can create so much noise that it undermines trust in the system, and lost trust leads to missed incidents. Strategy ensures the tool becomes a reliable partner rather than a constant distraction. The third lever in the title is response hooks, and this is where malware defense becomes operationally powerful, because response hooks are the mechanisms and predefined actions that allow containment to happen quickly. A response hook is a trigger that connects detection to an immediate response step, such as isolating a device, disabling an account, revoking sessions, blocking a malicious domain, or forcing a password reset. Without response hooks, detection can become a slow human process, where an analyst sees an alert, investigates, contacts a team, and eventually takes action. But malware moves fast, and that delay can mean the difference between a contained endpoint event and a widespread incident. Response hooks must be designed carefully because automated actions can disrupt legitimate work, so leaders must decide which triggers are strong enough to justify automatic containment and which require human confirmation. A mature approach uses hooks for high-confidence, high-impact signals, like clear evidence of ransomware behavior or credential dumping, and uses guided response workflows for ambiguous signals. Beginners sometimes think automation is risky, but in malware defense, measured automation is often safer than slow manual response because speed reduces damage. Response hooks are how you transform detection from information into protection. Response hooks also depend on having clear playbooks and permissions, because even the best hook is useless if the team cannot execute it or does not know what to do next. A playbook is a predefined sequence of actions that guides responders through containment, investigation, eradication, and recovery. Response hooks often implement the first containment steps, but the team must then assess scope, identify the initial entry point, and ensure the malware is removed and cannot re-enter. This is where identity controls matter, because malware incidents often require credential resets, session revocation, and review of privileged access. A response hook might isolate a device, but if the attacker already stole credentials, the attacker may still operate elsewhere. Leaders must therefore anticipate that response is cross-domain, involving endpoints, identity, networks, and cloud services. Another aspect is communication, because response requires coordination with IT support, affected business units, and leadership, and confusion can waste precious time. Beginners should understand that response hooks are not replacements for incident response. They are accelerators that buy time and reduce spread. When hooks are integrated into playbooks, the organization becomes faster and more consistent, which reduces both damage and stress. A practical way to see how these three levers reinforce each other is to imagine malware attempting a typical chain: initial delivery, execution, persistence, credential theft, and lateral movement. Hardening attempts to break the chain at the beginning by reducing the chance execution and persistence succeed, and by limiting what the malware can do if it runs. EDR attempts to detect the chain through telemetry as soon as suspicious behavior begins, ideally before the attacker achieves their next objectives. Response hooks attempt to cut the chain quickly by isolating the endpoint or revoking access so the malware cannot continue and the attacker cannot use stolen credentials. When the levers work together, the chain is interrupted at multiple points, which means the attacker must succeed repeatedly rather than just once. That is the essence of defense in depth, and it is especially important for malware because attackers will retry, adjust, and pivot. A beginner misconception is that you only need one strong control, but with malware, one control is rarely enough because malware uses many methods. Layered levers reduce the probability of successful compromise and reduce the impact when compromise occurs. Hardening also has to be balanced with usability, because overly restrictive settings can create workarounds that increase risk. If users cannot install needed tools through approved channels, they may download installers from unsafe sources. If macros are blocked broadly without providing alternatives, teams might move workflows to uncontrolled environments. Leaders must anticipate these behavior-driven risks and provide safe pathways for legitimate needs. This is why hardening is not only a technical exercise, but also a governance and support exercise, involving approved software catalogs, clear exception processes, and training that explains why restrictions exist. When people understand the why and have a workable alternative, compliance improves. When people feel blocked without help, they improvise, and improvisation creates shadow IT. The right approach is to harden by default while maintaining a controlled, well-documented path for exceptions and special cases. In that model, restrictions are not barriers. They are guardrails with clearly marked gates for when gates are needed. This balance is what makes hardening sustainable rather than brittle. EDR strategy also involves deciding what success looks like, because leaders can easily fall into the trap of measuring success by the number of alerts rather than by reduced incident impact. A mature success definition might include reduced time to detect and contain, fewer widespread malware events, and clearer visibility into endpoint behavior during investigations. Another success indicator is that high-confidence alerts result in fast, consistent response actions that reduce spread. Strategy should also include tabletop thinking, meaning considering what happens when a detection occurs at 2 a.m., when the main team is unavailable, or when multiple alerts arrive simultaneously. If response depends on a small group of experts, the program may be fragile. Leaders should design coverage and escalation paths so response can happen reliably. Another aspect is maintaining trust in the system, which includes tuning alerts, reducing false positives, and ensuring that when employees report issues, the response is timely and helpful. Trust influences reporting behavior, and reporting can be an early signal of malware, such as a user noticing unusual prompts or slow system behavior. When the EDR program is reliable, both analysts and users become more willing to engage with it, which strengthens detection and reduces time to action. For beginners, the key is that EDR success is measured by outcomes, not by activity. Response hooks must also be designed with containment boundaries in mind, because malware incidents often require decisions about how far to isolate and how much to disrupt. Isolating a single endpoint may be enough for a low-impact detection, but if evidence suggests credential theft, you may need to revoke sessions across services and reset credentials for multiple accounts. If ransomware activity is detected, you may need broader containment to protect shared resources. Leaders must anticipate that these decisions have business impact, so they should be tied to predetermined thresholds and decision rights. Decision rights matter because when an incident is unfolding, delays occur when nobody feels authorized to take disruptive action. Response hooks can automate some actions, but for bigger actions, the organization needs clarity about who decides and how quickly. Another important concept is preserving evidence, because rapid containment should not destroy the data needed for investigation. This is why response playbooks often include steps to collect logs and snapshots before full cleanup. Beginners should understand that speed and evidence are both valuable, and a good program designs for both rather than choosing one at the expense of the other. When response hooks are planned and tested, containment becomes both fast and intelligent. Malware risk reduction also benefits from learning, because each incident or near miss reveals which controls are effective and which gaps remain. A mature program treats malware events as inputs to improve hardening baselines, EDR detections, and response hooks. If malware arrived through a particular file type, you might adjust controls to reduce that pathway. If a detection occurred late, you might tune EDR to recognize earlier signals or collect additional telemetry. If response actions were slow, you might adjust hooks or clarify decision rights. This learning loop prevents the program from becoming static while the threat evolves. It also prevents blame culture, because the focus is on improving system resilience rather than punishing individuals for being targeted. Beginners often think the goal is to prevent any incident from ever happening, but a more realistic goal is to reduce frequency and reduce impact while continuously improving. This is how organizations stay resilient despite changing attacker behavior. When learning is part of the program, the controls become more tailored to the organization's real risk profile, which increases effectiveness over time. As we close, reducing malware risk is not about finding a single perfect tool, because malware is adaptable and because human error and software complexity make some exposure inevitable. Hardening reduces risk by shrinking the attack surface, limiting execution pathways, constraining privileges, and enforcing secure defaults that make common malware tactics harder to succeed. An EDR strategy reduces risk by providing visibility into suspicious endpoint behavior, prioritizing meaningful detections, ensuring consistent coverage, and tuning alerts so teams can act decisively rather than drowning in noise. Response hooks reduce risk by connecting detection to rapid containment actions, supported by playbooks and clear decision rights. So malware has less time to spread and less opportunity to steal credentials or damage systems. When these three levers work together, the organization becomes resilient, meaning malware events are less frequent, less damaging, and more controllable. That resilience is the leadership outcome that matters most, because it keeps incidents from turning into disasters and keeps operations stable even when threats keep evolving.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.